and that's for a reason, right? You give your kids a tour of the Capitol Hill. That's what I did when I had my 4-year-old son here. It felt like I was visiting a museum because that's not where the laws are actually made anymore. But the people who issue binding edicts are accountable to the people who they bind. It's a core premise of the American founding. As I understand it, that's not what we're going to mostly focus on today, unless you want to take us deeper in that direction, because that largely relates to domestic policy, although I think there are deep implications for the direction of our foreign policy as well that are underappreciated. That's the first basic principle, though, of the America First movement that started not in 2016 but in 1776. The idea that the people who we elect to run the government should be the ones who actually run the government. And then there's the second premise, and I think that is closer to the subject of our discussion today, that those people who we do elect to bind us with their edicts at home, they owe their sole moral duty to the citizens of this nation, not another one. Shouldn't be very controversial on its face. Nothing I just told you is particularly partisan. The people we elect to run the government should run the government, and their first and sole moral duty is to the citizens of this nation, not any other one. It's not a black idea or a white idea. It's not a particularly red idea or blue idea either. There have been points in the last 40 years where Democrats have advanced these ideas more so than Republicans, and there have been points in the last 40 years where Republicans have worn the mantle of those ideas more than Democrats, and I think that that's the moment we fall into now. Those are the basic ideals of our founding. So let's take a look at that second premise a little bit more. I think right now we're failing on both counts, but we'll focus on the second premise today. Are our elected leaders implementing a foreign policy that is exclusively designed to advance the interests of U.S. citizens? I posit the answer to that question is no. I posit that the answer to that question is no based on the results that we experience in this country. We are expending far more of our own military resources to protect the borders of other nations than we're using to protect our own borders in the United States of America. You're going to fix the southern border crisis. It does not require additional legislation. What we require is an enforcement of the laws that are already on the books. This is where it intersects with principle number one. The people we elect to run the government, they're not running the government because they're not actually implementing the policies that already supposedly represent the law of the land. I think we are perfectly justified to use our own military resources, talking about air, land, sea, Coast Guard included, to protect our own borders, to deputize the National Guard and to deputize, using 287G and other measures, even local law enforcement, to provide added resources to protect our own borders in this country, which we're failing to do. 10 million illegals have invaded our own country over the course of the last 4 years alone, an upward total of 30 to 40 million people who are in this country illegally. If you think about it, even if 1% of those, I think this is a conservative estimate, by the way, but even if 1% of those who entered the country illegally, out of every 100 who came in, let's just say one had really bad intentions, that would be upwards of 300 to 400,000 people in the United States right now who have ill intentions towards the United States, potentially violent intentions towards the United States. And I think the number is actually likely to be much higher than that. And yet, our own foreign policy expenditures, our own defense expenditures, are directed towards protecting other people's borders more than they are to protect our own borders in the United States. I think that is a failure of the basic principle that our own elected leaders are not owing or exercising a moral duty to the citizens of our country, but they're exercising their duties to the citizens of other countries, directly, advertently, or not. And so I will make things a little bit spicy by getting from the theory into the specifics to foreground maybe a discussion we could have by talking about 3 different conflicts in which I think that is true today, actually. At least evidence of a violation of that. Right now, we are forking over the next $100 billion, roughly, to Ukraine without an iota of explanation of what the next $100 billion is going to achieve, that the gets a mistake. I think any premise for a debate, if you're even going to have a debate on the idea of sending more money to Ukraine, with the first. I come from a business background. I've been a founder of multiple venture-backed businesses. If you have burned the first million or 10 million or $100 million of venture capital money thrown into your company, and you go to your venture capitalist or your investor, the answer is what you're going to achieve with the next round of funding that you didn't achieve with the prior round. Well, Zelensky came here and told us that it was not charity, but it was an investment. Well, it was his language, not mine. The basic language of an investment would require answering why the return on that investment for the United States of America is going to be greater than the last round of investment, which was an abysmal and utter failure. But it's not just the financial commitment. If it was just the financial commitment, if you look at this in the scheme of the U.S. defense budget, it's bigger than it should be. I think it should be zero at this point for further investment into Ukraine. But it's not actually just the financial impact on the United States that actually betrays our own interests. I think in some ways people on my side of this issue, if I may say for some of us in this room, on our side of this issue, the mistake we make is reducing this to the financials. Sure, would that money be better spent at our southern border than defending the border of Ukraine? Of course it would. But that belies the greater risk of that expenditure, which is not the increase of risk to our national debt, though there's an increment of increase there, but the increase in risk of drawing the United States into major conflict at a moment that does not advance our best national interests. Right now, the number one most dangerous effect of our arming Ukraine has not been the added $200 billion of our budget that's been sent over there. It's a false framing in some ways. It's a straw man that our side of this debate often falls into, because they could easily, on the other side, make the ROI-based argument for this being a rounding error in a budget. I think the actual cost of our decision to arm Ukraine is increasing the risk of World War III by driving Russia further into China's hands at a moment where the Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat that the United States faces today. I don't think that's controversial for anybody on any side of this issue. You look at Russia's nuclear stockpiles, you look at Russia's hypersonic missile capabilities, combine that with China's naval capacity and the fact that they have an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life, for our most important industries, from semiconductors to be potentially amplified on an annexation of Taiwan, to pharmaceuticals, to even our defense industrial base today dependent on China. Combine that with Russia's capabilities, they outmatch the United States in every area of great power competition. And yet our own policy decisions are driving Russia further into China's hands because of the limitation of choices that we've given Russia in their relationship with the West. I don't think all is lost. I think there still remains an opportunity to use the status quo as a basis to negotiate a deal that best advances U.S. interests, not just about saving the money, but about, in a lasting way, reducing the risk of that major conflict between the United States and the China-Russia alliance. Here's how that would look. Using the Ukraine war as a catalyst to do something that we probably should have done anyway in the last 20 years, and that is to reopen economic relations with Russia, reopen diplomatic relations with Russia, but do it not for free, as a condition for Russia exiting its military alliance with China, demonstrably exiting its military alliance with China, ending joint military exercises with China, no more joint naval exercises outside the Aleutian Islands, hundreds of miles from the shore of the United States itself. And I know that would be an alarming notion, but alarm bells are going to go off in Washington, D.C. when I present an idea like this. That's okay. That's part of the purpose of this. This runs against the grain of our it runs about as much against the grain of our contemporary foreign policy as it did for Nixon to propose a similar vision in the 1970s. It's about as ridiculous today to propose an end to the Russia-China alliance as a consequence for U.S. rapprochement with Russia as it would have in the 1970s for Nixon to say that we could do the same thing with China with respect to the then USSR. That was a ridiculous idea then, as it is now, but I think it takes an ability to think outside of the conventional norms to actually secure a more stable equilibrium. Back then, a Brezhnev-led USSR was in an alliance with China. We did what we needed to do, not because we trusted China, not because we trusted Mao, but because we understood that our own self-interest required pulling China apart from its alliance with Russia, with the USSR. I would now argue that Putin is effectively the new Mao. Do we trust Putin? No. Should we trust him? No. But can we trust him to follow his self-interest just as he can trust us to follow ours? That's the best bet that each side has. So if we reopen economic relations with Russia, negotiate a reasonable end to the Ukraine war, using that as a catalyst for negotiating an agreement that we otherwise couldn't have had, but as a condition also require Russia to exit its joint military exercises with China, exit its military presence in the West, Russian military presence in places from Cuba to Nicaragua to Venezuela, where many people are not aware that Russia has a military presence today. That actually advances the interests of the United States far more than the dollars that we would save, because it reduces the risk of major conflict, moving us from a bilateral international order right now between the United States and China that increasingly favors China because of the Russia-China alliance, to a trilateral international order in which none of the three major nuclear superpowers are allied. Oh, and by the way, the counter-argument you'll hear to this, I'm a big believer in making sure that you understand the best argument for the other side. If you can't articulate that, that means you don't understand your own view. And so I'll give you what I believe is the strongest argument offered for the other side, is that such a move would only embolden China to invade or otherwise annex Taiwan. Because if Russia, with impunity, could go beyond the sovereign boundaries of Ukraine and annex territory that wasn't internationally recognized as theirs, then China will be emboldened to do the same. I'm tempted to go on an aside that we could take us on for a long time to say that, well, Ukraine's sovereignty was codified in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which we conveniently forget was only 3 years after James Baker's famous not 1 inch guarantee to Gorbachev that NATO would expand not 1 inch past East Germany, and yet NATO has expanded more after the fall of the USSR than it ever did during the existence of the USSR. But we won't go there. I think that reopens. We go there in our discussion, but I think that takes us off the basic point I wanted to make, which is that actually it's the inverse of that calculus when it comes to China's decision to invade Taiwan. Right now, China's calculus, I believe, is that the U.S. will not want to go to war with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time, Russia and China, so long as Russia and China are in a guaranteed military alliance with each other. But if Russia is no longer in China's camp, then China would absolutely have to think twice, at least think twice, before making any military move of any kind on Taiwan. Their leverage would actually be far lower than it is today. Leaders like Xi Jinping, autocrats like Xi Jinping, do not reason based on analogy. They don't analogize. They analyze what is their relative power. And I think that their relative power is greater when Russia's in their camp rather than analogizing what they're able to do based on what Russia was able to do in a different theater. So that's my perspective on Ukraine. Before we get to the other topic, is probably the second topic that everyone would bring up, which is what's going on in the Middle East. I'll actually take a tour around the Soviet perimeter to what's happening in Azerbaijan. It's interesting, the same crowd, this is item number 2, the same crowd, even in corridors not far from where we are right now, that will scream bloody murder when Putin crosses the boundaries of the internationally early 1990s recognized boundaries that we're supposed to respect in Ukraine, have nothing to say about Azerbaijan's incursions on the Nagorno-Karabakh region in Artsakh, where the Armenian Christians, 120,000, have lived and have more recently been displaced. Now, people, when I've brought this issue up over the course of the campaign trail in the last year, one of the pieces of feedback I get is, well, aren't you talking out of both sides of your mouth here? Because in one case, you're saying that the U.S. should not intervene to protect Ukraine, and yet you're calling out the injustice of Azerbaijan's incursion on the Armenian Christian population in Nagorno-Karabakh. For those of you who follow that, that was a semi-autonomous region, internationally recognized in the early 1990s as a region that was going to be, it was formally part of Armenia, but recognized as quasi-autonomous region that Azerbaijan was supposed to respect, which in recent years it has absolutely, effectively invaded and driven 120,000 Armenian Christians out through persecution and otherwise. But the irony is actually non-intervention is the answer in both cases, because the dirty little secret is that, maybe not to many of you because you're in Washington, D.C., where the Azerbaijan lobby is as strong as it is, Azerbaijan is funded by the United States of America. So that itself is a product of U.S. intervention that led us to the very catastrophe that leads us to a hypocritical position, not recognizing the internationally recognized boundaries of sovereignty in one case, while we're using U.S. military resources to come to the rescue of the Ukrainian invasion in the other case. Actually, it's the current status quo and establishment that's bipartisan, frankly, in this country, that's talking out of both sides of its mouth, funding Azerbaijan for the last several years, not saying a peep about its incursion into the Nagorno-Karabakh region, while pretending like it has to be the top U.S. foreign policy priority to come to Ukraine's rescue to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, while increasing the risk of World War III by driving Russia further into China's hands. And of course, that leaves the third and perhaps most controversial third rail that I've been advised not to touch, but I believe in candid conversation, and I hope that's what we're having today, is how we analyze the situation of U.S. engagement in the conflict in the Middle East with what's going on with Israel and Gaza. Now, here's my view, is not each situation is the same. You don't just analogize each situation, you analyze each situation independently. Israel is a more important ally to the United States in advancing our interests in the Middle East than is Ukraine. I think I can bluntly say that these two situations are not tantamount to one another. Nonetheless, I think we have fallen into a trap that actually leaves both the United States and Israel worse off as a consequence of the United States financially intervening in this particular war. The reason is Israel's rate-limiting step to its own success is not money. People forget Israel's own national debt per capita is less than the national debt per capita in the United States of America. So it's a bizarre move to say the way we're going to help somebody who is not financially constrained is through some form of financial aid. It's a bizarre step. It's a bizarre step, especially because the thing that Israel is short on is diplomatic latitude to be able to defend itself. Diplomatic latitude from the UN, the EU, and increasingly even the United States of America. And so it's my view that both the United States and Israel, and I say this because it's a paradigm not just for our relationship with Israel, but our relationship with all of our allies. Both the United States and Israel would be better off if the United States stood diplomatically for the right of Israel to defend itself, just as we believe in the right to defend ourselves if there's an incursion at our own southern border. God forbid something like what happened on October 7th happens here in the United States, although I do believe that's what our border policies are signing up for. That Israel has a right to defend itself, but we constrain our ability to provide that diplomatic Iron Dome when we assume responsibility for those consequences through financially intervening in that war, pretending as though the sale of arms is never an option, when in fact you could actually open up that as an alternative option to engaging in foreign aid to a country that actually is not rate limited by its financial circumstances today. And so hopefully that gives you at least a bird's eye view of my perspective on three of the most important foreign policy engagements at the moment right now, one of which is strangely and bizarrely ignored by the press, that in Nagorno-Karabakh of the Armenians who are suffering at the hands of the Azerbaijanis. But more broadly, it brings us back to the grounding principle that George Washington left us with in his farewell address in 1796, which is that we the people elect a government that is accountable to us. We the people put people in charge of the government who are accountable to us. We can vote them out if they don't serve us, but their first and sole moral duty is to the citizens of this nation, not another one. To me, that's what real America First means. It doesn't come with an asterisk. America First includes all Americans, but it starts with Americans first. Citizenship itself is about duty to a country. One of the reasons in the campaign trail I supported a policy which has seemingly nothing to do with foreign policy here, but it does. It's about foreign policy for the middle class, is the theme of today's discussion, is that I believe every high school senior who graduates from high school should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a voting citizen of this country. It's a demonstration of your civic duty to your nation. Citizenship isn't about what you get. It's about what you give, actually. Citizenship is about your loyalty, your duty. That's why I happen to believe that the concept of dual citizenship is an oxymoron for different nations at the same time, because another at some point. And the question is, as a citizen, to which nation do you owe your exclusive, undivided loyalty? That's why legal immigrants to this country are required to not only pass a civics test to demonstrate they know something about this country, but are also required to swear an oath of loyalty to this country. That's what citizenship is about. But the flip side of citizenship is that that loyalty is a two-way relationship. It's not a one-way relationship, it is a two-way relationship. And just as we as a country have lost our notion of citizenship, it's no accident that we see at the same time in our history that we have lost our sense of what citizenship is all about, the loyalty of a citizen to his nation. It's precisely at that moment in our history that we have also lost our sense of what is the duty owed to those citizens by their elected leaders in places like Washington, D.C. And I think those two are two sides of the same coin. And one of the things that I hope to do in this country in one way or another, in whatever way a young person who hasn't been in politics can, but as a citizen, is to revive our duty to this nation, and in so doing also to revive elected leaders who remember that their first and sole moral duty isn't to them, isn't to their pocketbook, isn't to citizens of some foreign nation, but to the citizens of the nation that they serve, the United States of America. Thank you for the warm welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to a discussion. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, making sure this is on. Cool. All right, so at the risk of a very shameless plug, our magazine was founded in 2002 by conservatives and friends against the Iraq War. And it occurs to me that the true fault line in what I believe is a GOP civil war is where a man or woman stands on foreign policy. You announced your campaign for president in the spring of 23, if memory serves. and
It's late February, but
okay.
spring by the time anybody heard about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you as ideological on foreign policy then as you are today? Because I believe the seminal sort of exchange of the campaign wasn't between President nominee Trump or even Matter of DeSantis, et cetera. It was between you and Ambassador Haley on the nature of America's responsibility abroad. Did you find your exchanges with your rivals intensified your views, and did you find you learned a thing or two from folks on the trail?
Yeah, so the answer to the latter question is absolutely. I learned far more than I contributed over the course of the last year, mostly from citizens across this country who care deeply about the future existence of their country. And yes, I learned more than I contributed, but I contributed also what I learned. What drew me into the race originally was a vision for a domestic revival of this country. Right? I feel like we have lost our national identity, our sense of who we are. And especially young people in my generation and younger, have lost their sense of what it means to be an American. I was drawn in part due to some of my own personal experiences and battles in corporate America and in the economy, seeing the infestation of woke culture and anti-American ideologies into every institution, from our universities to corporate America to our companies to nonprofits. That's what pulled me into the race, and it was core to the themes that I addressed throughout the race. My vision of foreign policy wasn't on day one a core element of I had my views, but it wasn't where I defined my candidacy. I would agree with you that certainly by the end of it, the thing that was most distinctive about my candidacy versus everybody else on the debate stage was my unabiding commitment to America First principles. A lot of people will use that word, but are ready to discard it when it conflicts with their other pre-existing commitments. And so I do think that those debates were useful. I think they were productive because it smoked out something that we're at risk of, frankly, papering over right now. I mean, it does make me vomit a little bit, gag a little bit when we talk about the divide in this country as being between Republicans and Democrats right now. Certainly when it comes to foreign policy, it's not. It is emblematic of a deeper division between those who believe that the role of the United States of America is something other than serving its citizens versus those who do. And I think there are some in the Democratic Party who are actually more sympathetic to that view than they'll admit. And there are many in the Republican Party that right now, in a rush to show party unity or whatever that means, are eager to bury what is a deep ideological division within the GOP. And I think, conversely, I believe the Republican Party in our country will be the strongest version of itself if we actually smoke out those differences and are able to have respectful, even if vigorous, debate about those ideological differences. One of the things I learned was that, unfortunately, some of the people who are the most vociferous advocates of the alternative view, call it a neoconservative view, aren't actually all that well educated in why they hold the views that they do. I think they hold the views that they do in part because they are what the American system has become, an assembly line for politicians becoming products that are funded by people who write checks. But I do think that that betrays stronger arguments for the other side. Like, I think if you look at the people who write for the editorial board, whoever writes the staff editorials of the Wall Street Journal, say what you will, they're at least thinking people, right? These are intelligent people, but I think the politicians who, even at the presidential level often, who are responsible for serving as the mouthpieces of those views, often have very little idea why they adopt the views that they do or where the places that they pontificate about would appear on a map. And so one of the things I endeavored to do during the presidential campaign was to smoke out that level of hypocrisy, that level of utter absence of knowledge. But I think that in some ways did not allow us to get to the core of the debate of having actually the real argument, which says that the job of the United States is to serve as the unambiguous arbiter of international justice versus the job of U.S. elected leaders to be exclusively looking after the best interests of U.S. citizens. And I think there's a really interesting debate to be had there. I don't think we got there in the context of the presidential debate, because while I had the sole view on that debate stage, I would have loved nothing more than a ideological peer to spar with on the other side, but what we actually found were mouthpieces who often did not know why they were saying what they were saying, but were going through the motions as a matter of muscle memory acquired over 30 years of partisan sausage making. So that was my experience, but I think that debate still lies ahead, and I do think that it will be good for the country for us to be able to have it in the open.
All right, I will appreciate the very eloquent dunk on Ambassador Vivek.
Interpret it how you will.
Yes. Something you did say leads into my next question, though. You did have a tit-for-tat of sorts, if memory serves, with the Journal Editorial Board, specifically on your Taiwan policy, and you referred to it a little bit in your remarks. If I recall, it is that you think the U.S. should declare unconditional support, essentially, or more or less, correct me if I'm wrong, for Taiwan until we get to a point where we can reshore, and then policy has to change. So far as I'm aware, there's a totally sui generis policy proposal. If you were advising the 47th President of the United States on this issue, would you hold to that line? And then secondly, as I think perhaps everybody in this room knows, Chairman Xi has ordered his military to be ready for 2027. That could be a fake out. He might invade in 2025, or he might literally do nothing.
Yeah.
You're a pretty experienced guy. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so I think what's going to happen is not yet determined, is what I believe. I think it will depend on a number of factors, including who's in the White House. And I think that the probability that Taiwan is invaded or annexed goes down dramatically if Donald Trump's the president. It goes up dramatically if Joe Biden's the president. But I can go into that political reason and rationale, separately. To your earlier point, one of the things I did discover is even those who are ideological and ideologically coherent, even if different from my own ideology on foreign policy, like those friends of the Journal Editorial Board, did take the opportunity in a way that disappointed me to, and it's one thing when dumb people do it, but if smart people do it, you know what they're doing, is to purposefully mischaracterize what view they're up against because they would rather not contend with the essence of the view. And so I tried my best not to let them get away with it. But we had, some tit for tat on that, as you mentioned. My policy on Taiwan is you could argue, stronger than any defense hawk posture on Taiwan, which is that we have to move from strategic ambiguity, which is the U.S. posture right now, which is we won't say what exactly we will do, to a position of strategic clarity, where we draw a clear red line, where we say, no, the U.S. will defend Taiwan if China invades or otherwise annexes or attempts to forcefully annex Taiwan, at least for the foreseeable future, because it's in the U.S. interest to make sure that we do that. Our own modern way of life depends on leading-edge semiconductors manufactured in Taiwan. Everything from the phones in our pockets to the lights in the back of this room to the refrigerator that kept your bottles of water cold before they brought it out are powered likely by leading-edge semiconductors. Our modern way of life grinds to a halt if China exercises leverage over our ability to live a modern first world lifestyle. So yes, it is in our interest to make sure China isn't squatting on the semiconductor factories, just as it's in our interest to make sure that in the long run we're not exclusively dependent on Taiwan to onshore production to not only the United States, but to diversify our supply chains to countries ranging from Japan to South Korea to other countries where we could more feasibly do it in the foreseeable future. I think that could be, if we really put our efforts to it, could be a period as little as 5 to 10 years that we're able to successfully achieve that milestone. But in the meantime, it is unconscionable. It's an unconscionable risk, an unfathomable risk that China controls that semiconductor supply chain, which is the main reason why I say for the foreseeable future, the United States needs to be clear, draw a red line, and stick to it, that China will have no business annexing Taiwan, and we will militarily defend, moving to strategic clarity. At which point in the future, after we've achieved semiconductor independence, we can revisit that posture and possibly resume the current status quo of strategic ambiguity at that time. Now, this was bizarrely characterized as a weak position on Taiwan, which I found laughable because I've actually been, I think about as strong as they come on this issue. Well, most of the Republicans who criticize me for it, I think we're not aware that the current policy position of the United States is to respect the one China policy, is to currently accept the U.S. posture of strategic ambiguity, which I believe is insufficient. And so we did see this move in this jujitsu several times over in the campaign. One of the unspeakable truths that I touched during the campaign, I have no regrets about it, was also acknowledging the reality. It's an uncomfortable reality. It's not something that doesn't affect our foreign policy at all today. But you brought up principal conservatives who are against the invasion of Iraq. the whole premise for invading Iraq at the time, for people who recall it, was that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. We now know that to be, for all intents and purposes, false. However, what we now do know, that we were unwilling to admit then, even though the facts stared us in the face, is that Saudi Arabia did have a direct linkage to what happened on 9/11. Omar al-Bayoumi was a 42-year-old graduate student who randomly happened to bump into two of the terrorists, attackers, on that day, and said at LAX airport, he's just a graduate student, bumped into these people and housed them and opened bank accounts for them, things that normal friends who meet at the airport do. He's 42 years old as a graduate student. But the 9/11 Commission and the FBI both, at the time, said vehemently they believed his account and he had nothing to do with Saudi Arabia. 20 years later, in declassified documents that come out in the context of families of 9/11 victims now suing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we learn he was a Saudi intelligence operative and in touch with diplomatic actors at the highest level. That's just a fact. It's not saying we should do anything about it. It's not a conspiracy. It's just a reality and a fact we have to contend with. It would have been about as poor of an idea for us to invade Saudi Arabia as it was for us to invade Iraq. But the whole premise for invading Iraq was that they had something to do with 9/11, and yet you're not supposed to talk about another nation that did demonstrably have something to do with 9/11. And so I think on a lot of these issues, this is another one that really got under the skin of our friends at the Ed Board at the Journal. But what I will say is I respect at least the folks there for having thinking brains of representing an alternative ideology about the U.S.'s place in the world. But I wish we could have those debates a little bit more honestly rather than mischaracterizing the best articulation of the other side. Because I'm hungry for the best articulation of the side that I'm facing up against. But I think that our country would be better off if we advanced the best shake from both sides so that we can actually be the best version of ourselves at the end of it.
Cool. Final question. Softball, Israel. So I had a...
usual softball stuff.
I had a coffee last week with a fairly prominent Arab-American activist, Dearborn, Michigan. That's where he's from. Complete anecdote. Need a caveat that no one literally knows what's going to happen in November. He thinks that Trump will win Michigan by 10 points. He thinks that the polls are totally wrong. He's going to get smoked, Biden, that is. It occurs to me that the Middle East imbroglio is at this point just a negative asset on the president's balance sheet. The White House is pleasing no one. He is insufficiently pro-Israel for the campus protesters, and he is insufficiently anti-Hamas or Palestinian for the establishment wing of his own party. On the flip side, Trump appears to be benefiting from the impression that he himself stokes, that he is the most pro-Israel president in American history, and there's a pretty clean case for that. But additionally, he spoke in the Midwest. I believe he spoke in Ohio, where the crowd chanted, "Genocide Joe," and he said, quote, "They're not wrong." Again, consigliere, Ramaswamy here. New administration, this time next year. What do we do?
Look, I actually view myself as pretty closely aligned with, I would, for all I know, identically aligned with Trump's view here. I am pro-Israel. I believe Israel is an ally of the United States of America, and I think what Israel deserves is the diplomatic latitude that they're not getting from the United States to be able to get the job done that they need to get done. It's not up to us to define their war objectives. It's up to Israel to define its own war objectives. And it's up to the United States as an ally to give them the diplomatic latitude to do it, which is what they're missing today. And I think for a lot of reasons, Trump did not follow the standard party line of what you're supposed to say on every item of Israel. But when push came to shove, in terms of the results he delivered, from the move of the embassy to standing with Israel when it counts, I think he was actually a stronger ally of Israel than anyone else who recites the pieties has been. And I think our relationship with Israel in some ways is embodied by, I think, a cultural relationship. Israelis are very candid people. Donald Trump's a candid person. I'm a candid person. I think that candor actually causes the U.S.-Israel relationship to thrive and be the strongest and best version of itself. But at the same time, if the U.S. is providing war-specific aid in one particular war, then the U.S. cannot be in the position of having nothing to say. It's incoherent to be able to say both of those things at the same time. And so that's why many of the strongest pro-Israel voices in Israel are against U.S. added financial aid in Israel.
So if you were in Congress, would you have voted against the aid package that came out last month?
Yes. Yes, because I think that for all the reasons I described, I think it's not in the interest of the United States, and I think it's not in the interest of Israel. I would have voted against the aid package for Ukraine. I would have voted, this is a whole separate discussion, but I would have voted against the TikTok ban, Not because I think TikTok's an awful platform. There are major risks. But there are major risks for countless other platforms that are leverage of the CCP over them that we're purposefully ignoring. And people who have been asleep at the switch and paying attention to the Chinese risk of infiltration of the United States for decades somehow picked this as the lightning rod that they conveniently chose. Why? Because Meta lobbied for it. They're going to be the Instagram Reels or whatever is going to be the beneficiary. They're literally copying and pasting. People don't realize this. People say it's literally the same content. They're just copying and pasting on a different platform. Mark Zuckerberg gets the last laugh of the day. And by the way, if you want to know the best protectionism, diplomatic protectionism of the Chinese Communist Party by a social media company, I'll tell you what it is. It's the idea of social media companies at the direction of a government denying that the COVID pandemic originated in a lab in China. If you said on multiple different social media platforms that COVID started in a lab in China in the year 2020 or the year 2021, you were censored, your accounts were blocked, they were locked and shut down. And was that the product of a government in the backdrop secretly prodding these social media companies, as we worry in the TikTok case, talk about the CCP acting behind TikTok? Was it because of a government acting as an invisible hand guiding a social media company to behave that way? Yes, it was. But those social media companies were YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the government guiding them to do it was that of the United States of America, the same government that funded that research in China, through bureaucratic actors who are now evading accountability for their own actions. And so is China the single greatest threat the United States faces? Absolutely it is. And is the Russia-China alliance, does that put the United States at an even greater risk? Absolutely it does. Confront the actual threat. Anybody who is talking about TikTok who has nothing to say about 60 Chinese transformers in our own electric grid is not serious about actual protection against the real risk. What they're serious about is virtue signaling to you to make you think they care about a risk that affects Americans when they actually don't give a damn. That's what I believe. So yes, would I have voted against every element of that package? You're darn right I would.
You're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on behalf of Quincy Institute and my bosses, Laura Lumpy and Hypocrisy, who have been in the front row all day, and I'm the American conservative, your contingent here, and your support. Please, we've had a lot of speakers, a lot of issues, a lot of information, and I believe if you go to QuincyInstitute.org, QuincyInst.org, you have a ton of briefs and papers, and if you don't know much about us, this will be a good time to learn. And we also have American Conservative magazines on each of your tables, so please take them home. Great writing, great writers. Helen Andrews in the house back there is the editor of the magazine, and she's doing an incredible job. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope you'll follow us, both of our platforms. And responsible stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you. It's the truth of my views. It's not in anybody's interest. Yeah. Thank you.
To Mike. Truth shall set you free.
Gotta give him your car.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed it very much.
Hey, good to see you, man.
It was an articulate expression of America First. We don't hear that
Thank
very
you.
often, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got to go to the first principles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot,
very
man.
much.
I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
You give me your car? Oh, yeah, I will.
Thank you.
He's from Georgia. Yeah. Yes, he's my. Maybe we've done business in a previous life.
Yes, yes,
Good.
yes.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He's my Swiss banker.
good to see you, man.
Great to meet you.
Hey,
Huge fan.
thanks, man. Appreciate it.
What you're doing.
It's good to be here. What do you do?
I'm working for Congressman Pat Fallon.
For what's that?
Congressman Pat Fallon.
Okay, cool. Tell him I said hello. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Eisinger with the National Religious Broadcasters.
Oh, great. Good to meet
We
you.
work a lot on broadcasting issues, but I'd love to get more involved in the corporate space. We have a great relationship relationship with Strive and hoping to deepen that.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for
President
saying
Trump-
hello. Yeah.
President Trump came to our last convention and would love to have you there sometime. I think
Appreciate that.
You'd be a really welcomed voice.
Thank you. Let us know, and we'll evaluate
I'll
that
keep in
if
touch
it works
with your
out.
team. Would
Be
you
awesome.
mind if we took a quick
Yeah,
picture?
let's do it.
Thank you.
Let's do it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Great meeting you.
Thank you.
Jonathan from Clear Politics. There was a big announcement this week, 7.7% in BuzzFeed.
I'm
Do
not.
you have any comments?
Stay tuned.
Can't say anything about it?
Stay
Okay.
tuned. Stay tuned. I was required to file the 13D based on the number of days
Yeah,
after
yeah.
crossing, but I'm not going to say anything more than that right now.
Sounds good.
Stay
Thank you.
tuned. Thanks.
I met you I'm from Newport, so I met you at the Palmer Lucky event that time last
Oh, you
summer.
were? Oh,
And I was
nice.
at Amphis,
Okay.
I know Charlie's producers, and I was at CPAC with you, and then I remember I saw you there. So.
Yeah.
But I'll be joining the defense team in July, so
Good for
I'll
you,
be
man.
helping after the election. Day,
Awesome.
so, Yep.
We'll keep up the good work, brother.
Yeah,
Good to
we'll
see you
take a
guys.
picture
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Hey,
Hi, Sophie.
Sophie. Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
so
you.
much.
Nice to
Great
meet you.
remarks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you
So what do you do?
I work for a kind of political advisory firm.
Okay.
And I was at the summit actually with Paul Atlas in down in Palm Beach.
Okay, got it.
early
With
in
Scott
November.
Atlas.
Oh, Scott Atlas.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
that's great. Good to see you.
Can
Thank
I
you.
get a quick
Yes,
selfie?
absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you, man.
Last time with Brian Mule over at the Lincoln Club.
Oh, awesome. All right. Good to see you again.
The question I want to know is, where do you think you would best be fitted to serve in the admin?
Yeah, I think there's
Top three
a lot
most
of
effective roles
there's
for
I mean there's a lot of ways to make a difference. I ran to be president because I think the country requires a revamp, and I think Donald Trump's going to be the best person to deliver that. He's done it before. Things I focused on were shutting down the administrative state and the deep state, and shutting down the border, and actually fixing immigration once and for all. And so those are some of the things that I focused on in most detail over the course of the campaign. But even, look, some of the questions we talked about today are pretty fundamental as well. So keep an open mind, but whatever has the most impact is what I'm interested in. Thank you. Good seeing you guys. Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
We met before at, I organized an event you had at the American Enterprise Institute. In
Amazing.
2021
Okay.
With Robert Dorr.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I had a very different venue, very different foreign policy, but I didn't know how much we had in common back then on foreign policy.
Well, it sounds like we do, maybe.
Yeah, we do. We do
Yeah,
have a lot.
domestic policy will pull me into the race, but my views are mine, and so.
That's exactly what we need.
So, thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, dude.
Working on a piece for the American Conservative
Yeah.
right now. Rick Scott threw his name into the race. He just proposed a 6-year term limit for GOP leader. Your thoughts?
I like the idea. I didn't know that he had proposed that. I endorsed Rick Scott as soon as I found out he was running. I think he's by far the best of the candidates who's running, embodies good America First principles. He doesn't have to be doing it.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's serving because he loves the country. I think we need more people like it. He can do the job. He certainly has the capabilities, but he's also got the right ideological commitment to serving voters as opposed to serving special interests. And I think he is by far the best candidate, and he has my support.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Great seeing you.
Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
Thanks for coming in.
Good seeing you. Hey.
I want to introduce myself.
Good to see you, man. What's your name?
Olatunji.
Olatunji, good to meet you. What do you do?
I work in finance right now, but
Okay.
applying to law school
Okay.
for fall 2025.
Wish you well, man.
Big supporter. Can I
Thank
get
you.
another
Yeah.
coffee
Let's
with
do
you?
it. Let's do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
I was one of your delegates in Virginia.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Good to see you. Are you going to be at the convention?
Well, it was just before you withdrew from the race.
Oh, I see.
The deadline in Virginia.
I see.
So
I see. I
anyway,
see.
yeah,
Got
yeah,
it. Got
but
it.
anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you for being here, man.
Thank you for being here and for everything you do. Whoop, 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 whoop.
Thank you.
All
Thank you.
right,
Take care. Take care. Great event. Really enjoyed the intellectual dialogue. I feel like we don't have that. Washington D.C. You're talking about politics. It's usually sausage making, and this is, good thinkers. So that's why I came. It's a good group. Yeah. What'd you think?
I thought it was a great event. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
I love the magazine.
Did you get this one?
Oh, I saw this one. No, I didn't get a physical copy. Cool. Yeah. It's cool. Cool. Oh, hi. I'm proud. Makes me proud. And Warren was here earlier today too, right? Davidson and. Yeah, awesome. We'll take these. Yeah, sure. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
People like seeing how sausage is made.
Yeah, but also foreign policy people go into a shell. They're afraid of what to say. They're afraid of their own shadow, and I think we gotta have an open and honest conversation. So that's what I believe. So anyway, we're going to Michigan later today. So actually, we're going to live stream from Livingston County, Michigan, later tonight. I'm going to give a speech there and, hopefully really light up the energy in Michigan, which is going to be one of the key states this fall. I'm glad you guys are joining these live streams. These were fun for me, and I missed the campaign. I'm going to be really honest with you about that, because day to day just being challenged to be the best and sharpest version of yourself on these issues is something that I'm trying to fill in, doing a lot more in the private sector right now. And some of you may have seen some of the public evidence of that, but a lot more than what's visible right now to drive change through the private sector. But I also enjoy spending a good amount of my time continuing some of the kinds of things we were doing during the campaign, even if in a non-political context, which is what it was today, is more of an intellectual context. So anyway, we'll try to do these lives as much as possible, and I'm glad you guys are paying attention. So thanks for the support, and hopefully we'll see you guys tonight. It'll be on at what time do we think? Probably speaking at like 8:45, something like that, 8:45 Eastern, and it should be pretty fun. So we'll see you guys. Thanks.
Hey. I really appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, man.
Hope to continue.